Sometimes just because the Candyman can doesn't mean the Candyman should. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. If you're meeting me for the first time, hello, my name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I'm an independent theatre critic based here in the UK and this is my theatre-themed YouTube channel where I review the shows that I have been invited to go and see. And last week, I was invited by the brilliant team at the new Wimbledon Theatre in London to go and see the touring production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Based on the Roald Dahl story, first turned into a musical a few years ago. I saw the original production at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, from there it went to Broadway, and this is the first major UK revival of the show since. It started at Leeds Playhouse ahead of a UK tour, which is currently happening. And it's worth highlighting before I even begin this, there are quite a few substantial differences between the original production and this latest version. The material has changed significantly on the show's journey over to New York and then back again. This show has a very different casting approach than the original version did. And the way that the production is actually delivered in terms of the set and the direction also substantially different. And we're going to discuss all of those things today. To my mind, some of them are changes for the better and some of them are changes for the worse. I'm going to tell you why. If you enjoyed today's review, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews of shows both on tour, in the West End and on Broadway. And if you want to see even more of my reviews that don't all make it to YouTube, make sure to go and find me on other social media platforms. I am at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. Now, let's talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but first, enjoy this little sneak peek of the show's curtain call. So let's talk about turning this story into a musical. This story, which is a beloved book, which has already been adapted for an iconic film, which was then remade, and it concerns a young boy living with his family in poverty called Charlie Bucket. He becomes obsessed with a competition to win an exclusive private tour of the long-since-closed Wonka chocolate factory by finding a golden ticket in a Wonka chocolate bar. And he becomes the 5th recipient of one of these golden tickets after a handful of bratty and entitled children from around the globe. We then see Charlie and his grandpa Joe getting to take the tour with these other children and their parents. They get shown all of these fantastical and occasionally slightly horrifying scenes within the factory, and each other child's entitled and spoiled attitude leads to them finding themselves in some sort of a horrifying, possibly death-inducing scenario. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and in adapting anything to a 2-act musical structure, this is always going to be a challenge, because when you compare films and musicals, there is a very different arc in terms of pace. It's a big part of the reason why when adapting Wicked back to film, they feel as though they can't do the whole thing in one film because it has such a triumphant ending that nothing could possibly follow Defying Gravity, and that has to be the end of a film. But for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they made the decision to put the interval right before we go into the factory for the first time, which means the entire first act is this protracted exposition with Charlie and his family, and we get little cutaways to interviews with the other children from around the world, with a news team, with them finding the golden tickets and then doing little ditties that aren't particularly memorable where we meet them and we meet their parents. But for the most part, we just stay with Charlie and his family in this shack, and it's charming exposition at the beginning. We really get to know him and these other characters, his grandparents, and then we go through this back and forth of, oh, he's going to save up money to get a chocolate bar. Oh, and there's a golden ticket. Oh, but there wasn't a golden ticket in that one. Oh, and then going to try and find a way to get another chocolate bar. Oh, there's still not a golden ticket in that one. And it's just far too long. And then finally, at the end of the first act, we meet Willy Wonka, we get ushered into the chocolate factory, and then the first act ends. And the problem with all of this is if you think about that classic film or your memories of this book, I feel as though all of the most iconic scenes and visuals all happen inside the chocolate factory, right? You think about that first look at the chocolate room. You think about everything that happens to all of the other kids. You think about the glass elevator. And so for half of this musical to just be Charlie and his family in a shack and little interviews with these kids from around the world just building up to this arriving at the factory moment, that is way too long, way too drawn out, and then we have to squash all of the factory stuff into the second act, so we go through it at this ridiculous pace. Sorry, I've said the word chocolate too many times, and I have this thing where I can't watch a show that's going to have that much chocolate in and not have a chocolate bar, so I don't think I can talk about one either, and I'm going to eat this chocolate bar that Aaron bought for me today. It's sea salt and caramel. That's nice. So to my mind, this has always been the show's problem, this complete disparity in pacing and tone between these two acts. Not to mention that we go away to the interval having seen none of the exciting things we were expecting to. Honestly, this may surprise you, but I have never been a huge fan of the material of this show. I think it gets by on the inherent theatricality of the Roald Dahl story and the familiarity of that story and the colour of that story. It's such a rich source material to be able to adapt. You have these zany out there characters. It has a natural tension. It has a built-in moral. At the end, the only challenge that it presents is there's nowhere good to put an interval. But while the book has a decent amount of wit and credible charm, I don't rate many of the songs whatsoever. The best they are is a little bit lovely in the moment, but none of them are nearly as strong as Pure Imagination. There are a good few of them as well that are also at least a verse too long, particularly the song where Willy Wonka first emerges from the factory and sings "It Must Be Believed to Be Seen." This song is either too long or it's just because the staging in this version of the show did absolutely nothing with it and just had him there performing this while people looked on astonished and the whole thing was completely static. But like I said, this is a very different production to the original, so how have the changes for this production attempted to deal with that issue? Now, when I say this is a very different production to the original, it may not come as a surprise to you that what I really mean here is it's a cheaper production, and that's understandable. This was a regional revival, it's built to tour. I'm not expecting them to have the entire set that the Sam Mendes directed production did at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, a vast, vast stage and an enormous auditorium. However, the disclaimer I would issue, so much of this is not about money. If you can't afford a comparable production, we still at least need whimsy, we still at least need thrifty magic and illusion, and we need innovative staging and innovative design that is going to transport us. There have been productions that haven't had these huge lavish sets but have managed to conjure up a sense of wonderment. What we're missing here is not the budget, but we are missing the magic, almost entirely. One example of this is in the first act. There is a scene in which Charlie is asking his grandparents to recall what happened at the Wonka factory to cause it to shut down and close its doors to the public. And what then follows is a lengthy bit of exposition where it is just simply recalled, and there is nothing visual to accompany this. It's a backstory moment, and it's such a great opportunity to have somebody upstage reenacting this on a raised level in half light, or do something with shadow puppetry or projections, or something visual to accompany this. This is going to be a family audience show with a lot of children in the audience. If I'm getting bored in this sequence, I promise you they are. And the writing of Roald Dahl is so evocative with this imagery. I'm thinking about another Roald Dahl musical. I'm thinking about Matilda, where she is telling the story of the acrobat and the escapologist, and what we get is visuals to accompany this while she's telling Miss Phelps. Otherwise, the whole thing would just be very dry if it was just Matilda just reading this story, and that's what this production has opted for. Now, in terms of the set, in the first act, we have this shack that moves forwards and backwards. We have a junkyard set that comes together. And in the second act, we go into the factory. And because we've had this entire first act to build it up, we have huge expectations. We've seen this on screen. Like I tell you, if I said Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and asked you to recall that original film, you would probably think about that first chocolate room with the lake and the river and the waterfall and the trees and all of the wonder and magic of it. And in that original production, although it took far too long to arrive, when we went into the factory, we finally got that magic we'd been waiting for. In this production, not only have we waited so long to get there, but by the time we get into the factory, we realise it is just screens. There is projection in a big semicircle on the floor, there is projection on the back wall behind these characters, and when Gareth Snook as Willy Wonka sings Pure Imagination, he's just moving his hands while little colourful sparks are flying around him. There are some very clever and very detailed and very well-designed projections happening when they're in the chocolate room and when they go through the next rooms in the factory, but for the most part, there is no sense of wonder whatsoever. It's not unbelievable and magic what's created on that stage. We're lucky if we get a single set piece brought on in each different room of the factory. You can very clearly see how they are achieving it. There is a front to the set that lowers down with different doors on the front. It allows them to sort of pretend they're being moved around in an elevator around different parts of the building. And so what you end up with more often than not is this cast huddled together and pretending to move on this stage. The whole sequence with the boat, we have just the loose frame of a boat sort of held around them while they pretend that they're moving, and we have the projection in the background looking like Rainbow Road from Mario Kart on the Nintendo Wii. But this factory reveal is probably my biggest disappointment of the show, and what really wounds it for me. It's just such an anticlimax. It's a little bit embarrassing, honestly, watching these actors standing on this empty stage having to pretend to pluck things from around them. Like I said, it's not that they don't have the budget of the original, it's that they have no innovation to compensate for that. And this digitally rendered chocolate room transforms into different things before our eyes, kind of like an old Windows screensaver. But that doesn't add to the wonder that it can show us so many different things. That just makes none of them seem real to us. And a big problem with doing this digitally is there is another room later in the factory, the room where Mike TV is going to get shrunk and transported into a TV screen, that is all about technology. So having this first chocolate room be not real and tangible but technological kind of steps on the toes of that later moment. I don't think screens and a huge reliance on technology are going to create the same sense of wonder, because we can see how it's happening. You can put anything you want onto a screen. That's not blowing our minds. That's not a fantasy escape, and it's not magical. And it's not the huge, lavish, expensive things from the original that I necessarily remember. One of the most striking things about the original production for me was in the first act. Charlie sings a whole song. He is writing a letter to Willy Wonka about his family, and he takes it out of a drawer, I think, puts the paper down, starts writing it, and then in the original production, he would fold it into a paper aeroplane and go to throw it, and he would throw it, and it would fly from his hand to the back of the balcony in an enormous auditorium. Now, we saw that piece of paper come out from the drawer, so we never expected it. It's a wondrous moment. And in this version, the letter gets written, the letter gets folded, and there it stays. Like, that is not an expensive trick to be able to pull off. It's a challenging one to tour. I accept that because all these theatres have a different configuration, and I don't need them to replicate that exact thing, but it's that kind of innovation and creativity that this production lacks entirely. This production does credit illusion designers, but for the most part, that seems to mean when these children get transformed, how can we swap out the actors for props? And this is my next criticism, because again, an iconic part of these films and this story is what happens to the other kids in the factory. You have Violet Beauregarde turning into a blueberry, and in this production, she has this sort of like slowly inflating outfit on that kind of looks like she's about to lip sync for the crown on an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race, but she's not going to win. That starts happening to her, and then she goes off stage and they bring on this big bouncy ball with a head on it that kind of looks like it has her face on, but for the most part it just looks like a space hopper with blue fabric tied around it. With Augustus Gloop, we have the actor approaching the screen at the back of the stage and pretending to drink chocolate off of a screen. This chocolate waterfall then sort of erupts slightly more, making a chocolate river on the floor that they all step away from like they're playing The Floor is Lava, only the lava is chocolate. And we then get a digital rendering of Augustus Gloop being sucked up a pipe, and then they bring on another set piece that has a sort of a chocolate-covered Augustus Gloop sat inside, but it's a prop so it doesn't move. Veruca Salt just gets thrown into a bin and then wheeled off stage. It has considerably less menace than the way that this scene has previously been staged. The Broadway production is infamous for being slightly gruesome in the way that you see her, or it's implied that she gets her limbs torn apart by squirrels. Quick sidebar, I can't pronounce the word squirrels? I say squirrels. I call them squirrels. I've just come to accept that. It's what it is. We're going to move on. But here, her and her father just literally get wheeled off the side of the stage. There is no threat to it whatsoever. And then it's weird that afterwards, that's the one that gets characterized as a death, that Willy Wonka has a line implying that they're about to be killed. Mike TV's is probably the best achieved, with this sort of TV screen that they wheel on and this big sort of disappearing pod at the side, and then a little like mini prop Mike TV who's been shrunk in the TV. That one I have the least issue with, but the problem across all of these is because the set is so sparse, there's no real reason why the parents couldn't run over and grab them. So you have these parents stood a few feet away of dreadful things happening to their children who really don't try and restrain them or retrieve them or stop them. Specifically for when Veruca Salt is like leaving to run up the stairs and then gets dumped into a bin. It takes a very long time for her father to run after her. And if he was meant to be like slightly reluctant to do so because she's an awful child, then sure, but the whole time he's protesting and yelling and he's like, no, Veruca. And the same thing for Augustus Gloop's mother, who's like, no, Augustus, who is right over there. It very much reminded me of No Fly shows at Wicked when the cherry picker doesn't work in Defying Gravity and Elphaba stood in the middle of the stage and the guards have to go, look at her, she's wicked, get her. And we're going to lie on the floor because she's like right there and we could get her, but we need to make it look like we can't. That's the problem that this Charlie and the Chocolate Factory tour has. All of the parents could very readily intervene, but they don't, and so that makes the staging look super awkward. I have one more thing that annoyed me, and I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this one, but during the Mike TV sequence, he gets transported into a Pac-Man game, and then an Oompa Loompa gets sent in after him who chases him around this Pac-Man game, and we see it projected, I believe, on the back wall, and it's just like a normal Pac-Man screen, but he's running left and right, and then when there's a drop, he falls down and he has to jump up to get to higher ledges. And that's not how Pac-Man works. Like, that's Mario. They're playing Pac-Man with Mario gravity rules. Pac-Man is like you're seeing it in a maze in a bird's eye view, and they can just move interchangeably at the same pace around all of these things. We don't have to jump up to get around in a Pac-Man. That's not how Pac-Man works. It annoyed me. It annoyed me very much. There's more little things I could pick at, but I'm going to skip to a bigger moment slightly later on, because again, iconic visual from this story and from this film is the glass elevator. Now, they do this in a different way again to how they did it at Drury Lane. In Drury Lane, I think there was such darkness around the stage, and I think it was on an arm, kind of like the Defying Gravity moment, but it meant that you could stare into this stage and you would find it very hard to pick out how exactly this was working, and you could just suspend disbelief and it looked like it was flying across the night sky. For this one, I don't actually hate the glass elevator, but I do think they make two critical mistakes. So what they've done instead here is to have the whole thing suspended on 4 cables so it can lift up and it can go side to side, as well as varying its height, which is a cool effect. The way it travels and the way it moves, I think, is great. The way they've built this, perfect, but they don't help themselves in how it's been staged, because on the digital screen behind it and underneath we have bright daylight sky, so you can see these 4 cables at any given time. And maybe they don't mind about that. Maybe they don't need people to completely suspend disbelief, and maybe the wonderment of them flying across the stage in this suspended box is enough. However, the bigger issue I have with this is we see the glass elevator descend to the stage before they get into it, and then it goes back up. So there is no magic to that first flight of them lifting off the ground. Flying on stage can be wondrous to look at, but if we see the thing come down, it's no surprise that it's going to go back up. The scene that happens before this has Willy Wonka walking in on Charlie inventing things in his office where Willy Wonka has left Charlie, and the best way to do this would be for them to find a way to step outside so we could bring the front of the set down and show the exterior of the office, and then when Willy Wonka sort of turns and his mood changes in this scene and then he ushers Charlie into the great glass elevator, we can then have that go up and then, ooh, elevator's there. That wasn't there before. What's it going to do? It's going to fly off the ground. It's just slightly more magical, isn't it? It feels as though it is to me. Like I said, I have seen this show before. I am not an expert on all of the changes that have been made. My good friend Ellie of Ellie Talks Theatre has made a fantastic video documenting the changes that have happened to this show. So if you want to know specifically how this version varies to versions that have come before, you can go and watch her video. But they have cut the song Bubble. And plot-wise, they cut something I think was really important in the first act, where you have the actor who plays Willy Wonka, either in a disguise or as a different character, you can choose what this means, but you have that same actor meeting Charlie in the junkyard and helping Charlie to find the money to buy a golden ticket. And it sort of feels as though Charlie has been chosen in a way. And now Charlie just finds that money randomly and decides to spend it and sort of morally wrestles with whether or not he ought to spend it. So it's a little bit trickier and we lose some of the storytelling there. And it also means that we then have Charlie finding money that could very much feed his family and actively choosing to spend it on chocolate instead, which is not quite as fantastic from a moral standpoint when that's really what this story is all about. So before I talk to you about the individual performances, I want to talk to you about the casting approach to this show and how it varies. First of all, they have done something I think is fantastic, which is there are 4 child actors who share the role of Charlie Bucket, and 2 of them are boys and 2 of them are girls. And I saw a girl playing the role, and I was fascinated by how little it changed anything about the show. Now, obviously, they were still called Charlie. Charlie can be a girl's name. Charlie was then addressed with female pronouns throughout, even in the lyrics of the song Candyman. They would sing Candyman and then she because they're talking about Charlie. But pronouns aside, it changes literally nothing about Charlie's character, about Charlie's placement in the show. Nothing is changed by having Charlie be a girl, because Charlie is just this self-insert, morally upright and earnest, hungry young child who loves chocolate and cares about their family. There is nothing gendered about Charlie's characteristics. The show has also retained one casting idea from Broadway, which is to cast the other children with adult actors. This has been met with controversy in the past, but I actually really dig this idea. First of all, they've chosen actors that look a little bit younger, but because they're adults playing children, it's all a little bit exaggerated and played up and pantomime-ish, and you get immediately the difference between these other 4 children and Charlie in terms of genuine innocence and naivety, because Charlie feels all the more genuine as a child against these sort of comic caricatures of bratty children. And it also makes it a lot easier for us to be able to root for their demise and despise them a little bit because they're not children on stage. If you were to be implying the murder of a bunch of actual children on stage, I think there's something about it that's a little bit more challenging to swallow than if you have adult actors in these roles. You also have Charlie's mum and 3 of the 4 grandparents, the ones who aren't Grandpa Joe, playing the parents of the other children as well, so they multi-role between those characters. This is another thing to do with the show being a smaller budget production, being a touring production. I actually think that works very well. Now let me tell you briefly about a few of the standout performances. I have to start with Gareth Snook, who played Willy Wonka. He has such charm on stage. He has such whimsy and such theatricality. He has this lovely vibrato-y resonant voice. He could be playing Mama Rose in Gypsy for all I care. Willy Wonka is this deliciously strange character who is in turn childishly youthful and gleeful, and then turns like sinister and malevolent, and Gareth captures that very well with a sense of theatricality at all times. This is an inherently theatrical Willy Wonka. His vocal delivery is super classic. He gets this wry smile that creeps across his face when he knowingly looks out to the audience, when he is making sarcastic comments about some of the children on the factory tour. I think it's a tremendous piece of casting. At this performance, I saw Amelia Minto playing the role of Charlie Bucket. I thought she was brilliant, very sweet, very endearing, singing beautifully. I don't know if she naturally has a northern accent or if they just had her use a northern accent because this production originated in Leeds, but I liked that as well. Such a natural, believable rapport with Grandpa Joe and the rest of her family. I thought she was brilliant. Michael de Cruz was also wonderful as Grandpa Joe. He had this slight Dick Van Dyke quality about him. Again, youthfully gleeful and charming. That scene where he first gets out of bed and sings "Don't Wake Me, Charlie, I don't want to wake up from this chocolate dream" is brilliant because of the joy that he exudes when he is performing it. And he perfects that really sweet grandparent combination of this sort of earned wisdom and this return to childishness. It's very endearing. The other Bucket family members who also doubled up as the parents of the other golden ticket recipients, they each did a good job, as did the actors playing the children. I feel like everyone involved there could have dialed it up just a little bit more, because these Roald Dahl characters are grotesques. They are so animated, they are so colourful, and especially the actors playing the kids. They have scope to make these characters so awful and so detestable and so entitled. They could have so much more fun with it. I thought, for me, the ones who took it the furthest and gave the best performances were Teddy Hind as Mike TV, who was just so obnoxious it was great, and Kasmin Bora as Veruca Salt. And before I finish telling you about the casting, I do have to mention the Oompa Loompas. The Oompa Loompas who were robots, which probably a good decision because in a politically correct society I don't know how best to depict the Oompa Loompas. They first arrived and I was a little bit taken aback, but on balance I didn't really have a problem with this, not against all of the bigger problems that I had with the show. I suppose I ought to be able to tell you that pure imagination is the standout moment of this show, but the problem is the song is wonderful, and Gareth Snook's delivery of it is quite lovely and quite sincere, and it feels like he's telling you a story as he's gently singing you this beautiful music, but I'm too busy being dumbfounded by the complete lack of set as we walk into this room that is supposed to be mind-blowingly incredible. And my mind was not even a little bit blown. There wasn't even a slight breeze on my mind. So if I had to choose a highlight moment, it's probably those beginning exposition moments of the show, where you have Charlie singing the song with the letter, and you have the scenes between Charlie and their grandparents, because in those early moments of the show, I still had hope and expectations for the magical story I was about to be told, and those hopes hadn't yet been dashed. But those have been my thoughts about the current UK tour of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the musical. I hope you have enjoyed today's review video. If you have seen this production already, make sure to comment what you thought down below, especially if you disagreed with me. Let us know why. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!